notes. As Elizabeth said earlier this morning, we're going to be starting a new series this week, and it's a series that I'm calling $100 Words. That's like, have you ever noticed how in the church we like to use these big old long 15, 20 letter long words, these words with 5, 6, 7 syllables long. And people go to seminary for a long time, and let's say people pay a lot of money to learn these words and learn what these words mean. It's like learn how to use these words, while the average church member is left wondering, what in the world is that word that preacher just said? That's like, as a pastor, I even find myself often skipping over these words in my preaching. Maybe that's because I didn't go to seminary. But it's like, I've reached the point that I'm at with the church now, and it's in my preaching, by going through the route, and that's like a series of internships and a series of apprenticeships. And the funny thing about apprenticeships is they are free. They are volunteer work. You don't get paid to do an internship, or it's an apprenticeship, but I guess that's still better than having to pay back 8 years of college for the rest of my life. I just did all my training for free. But it's like, as I thought about it more, I realized that the reason why I didn't use these big words in my preaching was because I too was kind of unsure of exactly what some of these big $100 words meant. And it's like, I wasn't completely sure of their application. So how could I teach you guys something that I wasn't 100% sure myself? And so over the next several weeks, that I want us together to kind of dig into some of these big $100 words and to find out together what these words mean. And say, more importantly, how can we apply these big words to our lives? How do these big words apply to our lives? Now, say some of these words are words like sanctification. Have you ever heard that word, sanctification? Do you even know what that word really means? That's like, then the word justification. And then there's the word righteousness. I mean, what exactly do these words mean? These words are in the Bible, and these words are so important, but how many of us actually really know what these words mean? Most of us have heard these words. So if we've been around the church, we have heard these words. But the question is, do we really know what some of these words mean? That's like the word we're going to look at this morning is the word sanctification. That's going to be our word for today. Back when I was a kid growing up, I used to watch Pee-wee's Playhouse, and he had a word for the day. And it's like, our word for today is sanctification. So to find this word, you can turn in your Bibles to the book of First Thessalonians. And there's the 4th chapter, and if you use a Pew Bible, it will be on page 873. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we'll be reading verses 3 through 5. And it says, Paul's going to introduce us to this word of sanctification. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 3 through 5. It says that for this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you should abstain from sexual immorality. That's that each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and in honor, not in passion or in lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God. So Paul introduces us to this word of sanctification. Just a little background real quick. The letter of Thessalonians is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to a church that he started in the city of Thessalonica. Paul's time at this church as their pastor was cut short due to persecution. So what a surprise, Paul faced persecution. It's like Paul was basically ran out of this town. That's like, after some time, Paul would later send his student, or his apprentice, Timothy, back to check in on this church and to see how this church is going and to see what was going on in this church. That's like, so Timothy goes to this church, and so Timothy spends a little time support is also negative. So like it's one of those things where Timothy comes back and he's like, hey Paul, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. It's like, don't all of us love those kinds of starting lines when like somebody comes up to us and like, I got some good news and I got some bad news. This is what happened when Timothy comes back from his trip to Thessalonica, and that's like he comes back to Paul, and it's like he's like, Paul, I've got some good news and then I've got some bad news. That's like Timothy says that the good news is that in spite of all the persecution that is going on in this town, that this church is continuing in their faith. This church is continuing in their love, meaning that in face of all this persecution, that this church's faith is not being shaken. This church is still strong. This church is still vibrant. This church is not being shaken by the persecution. But Paul, there's bad news. And it's like, you have to remember, this is Timothy talking to Paul in these verses. That's like Timothy says, hey Paul, this church has a lot of questions, and this church has a lot of issues that I'm not equipped to handle. This church needs you. This church doesn't need me. This church needs a more seasoned person to answer some of these questions. That's like, so hence the reason for the books of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians being written. These two books is actually Paul's response to the report that Timothy sent back to him after his trip. So 1st and 2nd Thessalonians are actual letters that Paul wrote back to his church to address some of these issues. And that's like when we get to chapter 4, that's like the verses we read this morning. We can't assume that one of the issues going on in this church was the uncomfortable and the issue of sexual immorality. And it's like, I love the King James word. It's like the King James version, it uses the word fornication. And it's like there's an inside joke of that word between Andrew and I. I've always joked with him and said I'm going to preach an old school message one day on the word fornication, because he's back there laughing because we know a pastor who did a mock sermon on this word, and it's like he would say the word fornication. And so like there's an inside joke with that word fornication. But it's probably, this problem must not have been too big of a deal in this church, because like Paul just briefly talks about it. Paul just real quickly, in just a couple of sentences, he tells them to abstain from this, but it's nonetheless, Paul did have to address this problem of his church's morality. Evidently there was some bad stuff going on. But as Paul tells his church to stay away from sexual immorality, or like he tells them to stay away from fornication, and like Paul goes on to say, that's like, as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, we are to live a life of honor. We are to live a life that is not led by our passions and in our lust. And Paul throws in this big word. It's like, this is the first time we see this word, and Paul throws in this big $100 word, sanctification. And that brings the question, what is sanctification? What does sanctification mean? What is Paul trying to tell this church? What is Paul in this letter? What is he trying to tell us? That's like, real quickly, sanctification simply means to set something apart. There's to make it holy. It means to set something apart till it make it holy. That there's to sanctify anything is to declare that it belongs to God. So that you are taking something here, and so you are moving it right here simply to make it holy. That's what sanctification is. But here's the important thing to remember. That's about sanctification. Sanctification is a process. It does not happen instantly. That's like your salvation happens instantly. You are saved, and you are going to heaven at the moment you accept Christ. And so we will talk about that more next week when we talk about the $100 word, justification. Justification recently, but sanctification is a process. It is a lifelong process that we go through as a Christian. That's like becoming holy, that's like becoming sanctified is a process. Sanctification only starts at the moment that you first accept Christ. That's like sanctification doesn't end. As until we die, as we finally get to see Christ face to face. You can think about sanctification like this. I like to use word pictures to help me better understand something. But you can think of it like this. Think about the process that gold has to go through to become pure. Gold is dug up out of the ground. Gold is taken to a refinery. Gold is heated up, and gold is brought to a boil. Gold is transformed into a liquid form simply so that all of the impurities can be removed. Gold has to go through this long process before it can be considered pure. Gold is still gold before this process, just like we are still saved in the midst of this process, but it's not pure gold. This gold still has impurities. Gold has to go through this refining process. Gold has to be put through the fire so that all the impurities can be removed, so that it can be called pure, so that it can be called holy. It's like this here's the same thing for us. This is what Paul was telling the Thessalonians. This is what Paul was teaching them. This here's what Paul was trying to teach us. Paul was teaching us this concept of sanctification. It's this process of setting ourselves apart from this world. Paul is telling this church, and Paul is telling us, he's telling them that we have to set ourselves apart from this world. Just because the world tells us that something is okay doesn't automatically make it okay. Just because these people say it's okay, it doesn't mean that it's actually okay. We have got to, as followers of Christ, we've got to, as Christians, we have to, as a church, set ourselves apart. We have got to live lives of honor. We have got to start living lives that are not driven by passions and lives that are driven by lust. We are supposed to be living a life of sanctification. We're supposed to be living a life that is striving to be pure. And that is what Paul is trying to get across to this church. Paul says, I know y'all are doing some great work, but yet there is so much more still that you should be striving for. There is this process called sanctification. There is this process of becoming pure. There is this process of becoming holy. Your Christian walk, yes, it starts at the moment of your salvation, but there is so much more to it. There is still so much more to learn. That's like, sure, there are going to be days when we're less pure than others. There are going to be days when we cuss that guy that cuts us off on 81, and it's like we give him a universal symbol to let him know that he's number one in our life. And then there's times we're going to give into our passions. Yes, even as Christians, we are still humans. We are on this process. It's like there's why sanctification is a process. We will not achieve sanctification overnight. We will only truly achieve sanctification when we see Christ face to face, and it is Christ that actually completes this work in us. Our process of sanctification starts at our moment of our salvation, but this process of sanctification doesn't stop. That there's until we see Christ face to face, and Christ actually completes this work in us, his own self. That's like sanctification. I know sanctification is this long, old school, $100 word. It's like you don't hear a lot of churches today talk about this word sanctification. And it's like simply churches today they don't take the time to teach on some of these big $100 words. And it's like a lot of churches don't like to explain some of these big $100 words. These words are either quickly read over in a text, or these words are just skip complete. These words just skip completely. But like sanctification, it is such an important part of our Christian life and our Christian walk. This word actually is our Christian walk. This big word of sanctification, this is the lifelong process that we go through as a follower of Christ to be set apart, so that one day we can be called holy, be before a holy God. Because we can't stand before a holy God with impurities. We have to go through this hard, lifelong process of sanctification that is finally completed through the work of Christ. Christ is the one that completes this process of sanctification. And it's like this is such a big part of our Christian walk, and it's such a big part of our lives. And it's like truthfully, up until this week, I wasn't 100% sure on this word sanctification. I've read it 100 times. I've probably read it 1,000 times, but I've never really took the time and understood what this word meant. So that's kind of my hope. What's to go for these next several weeks is it's like I want us to look at these big $100 words, and I want us to find new meanings to these words, and I want us to learn how to apply these words in our life, because this big word of sanctification is so important, because this word is our daily walk with Christ. This is the process that we go through as a Christian. One day we can stand before God as holy. All of our mistakes from the past don't mean anything once we get to stand before Christ. All of those impurities that are in our lives, Christ will pure us from all of those impurities. Well, it's like if you've never accepted Christ, and if you have never started this process of sanctification, you can start this process today. Yes, you are saved instantly. Yes, you are going to heaven the second you accept Christ into your life. But there is this process of sanctification that we go through in this life. That's like if you want to start a new life, if you want to start a new life that is separate from this crazy world, that if you want to start a separated life, a life of following Christ, you can start that this morning as well. That if you want to start a life that is honoring to God, that if you want to start this life, you can start this life this morning. The only thing you have to do is this first accept Christ into your life, and so you can start this process of becoming holy. You can start this process of becoming pure. So like in closing real quick, the word sanctification is just simply the process of becoming pure. It's the process of becoming holy. It is a lifelong process that will be completed one day when we stand before God, and it's Christ will look at God. It's like Christ will say, "This is my child. This